Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. How are you doing? I hope you're enjoying your weekend, and I am sure that you are going to go and get yourself a lovely drink, something warm and cosy, or something sparkling and effervescent, because I've got a lovely story for you tonight, so I'm so thrilled you've joined me. But before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Click the notification bell and the thumbs up, and let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, I met Cynthia McKay at book club when I moved into a small rented apartment on the Oregon coast, where I'd taken up a position working for a solicitor's in an organisational role to manage the affairs and computer records in the offices. Cynthia McKay was about 83 years old and still going strong. She was self-assured, a vibrant personality, and was seated around the coffee table on a comfortable upholstered red velvety chair with the rest of the group, with her knitting in hand, discussing the book we were reading. There must have been about 25 people all in all, and the rendezvous in the local bar in town, hosted in a conference room that guests would hire, was set up in an agreeable, well-appointed sitting room, while the bar provided us with drinks and platters of sandwiches. We would meet up twice a month on a Tuesday. I had only just moved to the Oregon coast and was looking exceedingly forward to making friends and procuring a brand new exciting life for myself, laying down secure roots and hopefully solid foundations. I'd always been drawn to the ocean and was desirous to live a stone's throw away from the beach. It was something I'd always wanted since I was knee-high to a grasshopper. I was originally from New York City, but Oregon had always called my name. I knew that this was where I ultimately belonged. It was rather sad to leave my family and friends behind in New York. Of course it was. But then again, I could always visit them whenever I wanted to, and they could visit me. My family never comprehended my incessant need to live by the ocean, but the longing was ingrained in me and was not something I could rationally explain. It was after a holiday to the coast here as a little girl. I had emphatically decided that when I was old enough, this is where I would ultimately live, and I told my parents as much. But they took my wild commentary with a pinch of salt, only to realise that I had meant every word of what I'd said, that this was where I would live one day, and now here I was. My apartment offered me such pleasurable benefits of enjoying extraordinary oceanfront views, but given its close proximity to the beach, it came with a high rental price tag and was rather pokey and on the small side, but was all I could actually afford to rent at the time. It seemed like joining a book club was a promising, expedient way to meet new people and to get acquainted with some of the locals. Besides, I loved reading all kinds of fictional books for my personal gratification and entertainment. This was the quintessential opportunity to meet like-minded individuals like myself, whom shared a similar kindred passion. I'd always found reading far more satisfying than watching Netflix or movies on television, as reading always harnesses your imagination. There is one major drawback when it comes to reading. It can make your eyes get terribly tired and fatigued, as all that concentrating on words can be laboriously punishing. I was so impressed that this 83-year-old woman was so industriously independent, as I was to learn she lived on her own in a beautiful house overlooking the prepossessing views of the ocean. Cynthia did have a domesticated home help she hired, who I noticed was sitting in the corner of the room, not engaging with anyone, looking like a petulant, insouciant bull terrier, as she paged through a magazine, clearly indifferent and apathetic to the rest of the group. I remember thinking she'd have been more than welcome to join the rest of us in the reading group, but she was very detached. I clandestinely suspected she looked on our reading as rather unproductive as a pastime, but I could have said the same about the magazine that she was glancing through. I mean, how productive was that? I mean, who was she to actually pass judgment on what gave us great pleasure? I didn't like the character Eve in the book, says Cynthia. I felt the author didn't portray her realistically. I mean, when her sister died, she was so nonchalant, so blasé, exceedingly perfunctory, and I'm sorry, that's not a natural reaction to have, is it? Should she have not vented some emotional frustration? Shouldn't she have brooded in her melancholia? But she got on with her life as if nothing had happened. I thought it was extremely bizarre. It did bother me. Oh, I agree with Cynthia wholeheartedly, I said. If a close family member dies, let's face it, even if you're not that close to them, it's going to hurt hard. It's going to have some kind of effect on you. But the author failed to reflect the woman's distress, making her come across as cavalier and impassively uncaring. It was like she skirted past her emotions and didn't express any sadness about her sister's demise. And that's not natural.
Maybe that is what the author was trying to convey, says George, one of the men in our group. I mean, some people are not emotional, are they? I have a friend whose mother died a month ago. That guy did not shed a tear, nor was he overwrought or distressed, even though he loved his mother very, very much. I'm in no doubt about that. I wouldn't describe him as a cold fish in any way, nor indifferent, but I would say he was very resigned.
What's that supposed to mean, George? I ask.
It means that he was accepting of the circumstances.
He pauses for a moment to reflect on his thoughts.
It's like animals. More often than not when a dog in the family dies, or even a cat. Haven't you noticed how acquiescently accepting the animals are? It's like they view death so very differently to the rest of us. They have a much more resilient, healthy approach to life. I think you could use the word philosophical to describe it. Not that you would call animals philosophical, but they're much more accepting. We could do well to learn from them. You know, I think in our society we have such a grim, pathological view of death. We see it as shamefully morbid, a taboo subject that should be brushed under the carpet, never addressed. And I think that is terribly sad.
You've made an excellent point, George, and I agree with you, says Cynthia. I think people are terribly afraid of death. It's probably the fear of the unknown. I do believe there's nothing to be feared. I'm 83 years old going strong, and I emphatically know that this isn't all there is. Otherwise, what would be the point in our existence at all? It wouldn't make any sense. We're energy beings. We live on. Even science has now proved that. But maybe in a different form. But I know we don't die. If you think of it from that perspective, what is there to actually be sad about? Because when we die, we join those that preceded us, and the ones that come behind us will join us later. In the end, we all die. And from the moment we're born, this is the one thing that we cannot escape, as it happens to the all of us. I found Cynthia to be a fascinating, very intriguing woman. I'd come here to the book club to make new friends, but I certainly hadn't anticipated or expected to connect with a woman old enough to be my great-grandmother, or at the very least my grandmother. I loved everything about her. I was drawn to her personality like a magnet. She was a robust woman for one so slender, so feminine and delicate. Her back was as straight as a pencil, and her peachy skin was weathered not by the sun, but probably by loss of elasticity that caused some jowls and furrowed lines to imprudently trespass and meander across her skin, like the pronounced lines you see on a road map. There were some light endearing creases that feathered themselves around her pale blue eyes. I thought that her crinkled, time-worn skin gave her a plethora of character, rather like a piece of antique furniture that has abided through the generations and proudly wears its history in the quaint markings that are highlighted beneath the polished veneer in the wood. Let's just say Cynthia's face to me was like a fascinating, well-worn cover on a book that had a riveting story to tell. A new book would not have been nearly as appealing. I'm not actually sure if I was subconsciously looking for a grandmother figure in my life. Maybe I was. Maybe I wasn't. But growing up, both my grandparents on my father and my mother's side of the family were deceased. So I envied all my friends who had grandparents who would spoil them rotten and be an intricate part of their lives. I knew I was missing out, not having matriarch figures like that in my own life, like they did. My mother was quick to acknowledge this, always saying things like, "I wish your grandmother was here now. She would be so awfully proud of you, and your grandfather would be equally so." I don't know why we connect, I say to Cynthia one day. We're generations apart, aren't we? I feel as if I've known you all my life. Maybe I'm looking for this grandmother figure. I don't know what it is. But when I saw you at the book club, I was so drawn to you. I knew I needed to get to know you better, and I'm so glad I have. Maybe it's because you've lived. I find all your life experience so attractive. Maybe it's because you have found yourself. I think a lot of young people like me, we're still wrestling to find ourselves. I know I haven't found myself. Sometimes we're so caught up in the frenzied concerns of worrying about what other people think of us, when in reality, they probably don't think about us much at all. Then there is the constant need of social media to paint our lives in a glossy way, often for the purposes of making others envy our lot. Everyone does this when in reality these photographs have no bearing on our lives at all. It's only a snapshot of a happy moment in time, but one never posts up the sad pictures or the dark times. So let's just say people's impressions of other people's lives are deceptively false. Well, that would be true, dear. I don't have time for social media myself. It's a bit of a sensational world, where reality has been cast adrift at sea. People portraying themselves in the most favourable light. It's human nature, I suppose. It's what we do for validation and self-worth, which we all hanker after in our lives, like a hungry worm eating away at an apple from the inside out, if you think about it like that. Why do we try so hard to impress others? Isn't it such a pointless waste of time and effort? When I was your age, I had no idea who I was. I wanted to emulate people I thought were so impressive. I wanted to be someone I was not. But when you get to my age, you let all those pretenses fall away. They no longer serve your best interests. You begin to discover who you really are. And that is one of the good things about getting older. If you're looking for a grandmother figure, dear, I will happily fill the role for you. I would have liked to have been a grandmother myself, but it just wasn't to be. I couldn't have children, you know. I'm sorry, I say, pulling a sympathetic face. That really is too bad. Well, it is what it is, dear. It never bothered me, actually. I suppose me and my husband just accepted it. In those days, we didn't have the fertility treatments they have now. So you were pretty much stuck with your lot, if you couldn't carry a baby to term, that is. Do you feel you missed out? I asked Cynthia, who's pouring me some tea and passing it to me in a china cup. I'm impressed that her fingers are so steady. She doesn't even wobble, nor does a teacup tremble in her hands. I can see her domestic help, a woman called Selby Dianthus, is sitting in the corner of the room like an objectional centurion on guard duty, staring at us with gog eyes. I can tell the woman doesn't like me at all, but at least she doesn't interfere with our tea party, as her interaction would have subdued our jovial engagement. When Selby gets up to leave the room, I ask Cynthia all about her, as I cannot for the life of me understand what she's doing in Cynthia's life. She's like that odd piece of furniture in a room that just doesn't belong, and looks distinctly out of place, as it blatantly offends the harmonious flow of the decor. Who is she? I whisper to Cynthia. Why do you have her here? I notice she's always with you, hanging around you like a stray dog that's not really wanted, but you put up with her because you feel sorry for her. I get that kind of impression. Well, a while back, dear, I fell and broke my wrist. Then I was being encouraged by social workers to sell up and move to a retirement home. But I didn't want to do that. I realised getting someone to move into my house as a domestic help would keep their interfering butts out of my business. So that's why Selby Dianthus moved in. No other reason. Sometimes I feel like I'm being watched all day by her hawkish eyes. But it's better than being in a retirement home any day of the week. She's an idiosyncratic creature, you know. I couldn't think of a more uninspiring job than babysitting an older woman. She does have her uses, though, I'll give her that. I mean, she drives me around in the truck, helps me with shopping, cleans and cooks, as I'm not efficient like I used to be. She's been a great help in that regard, but in truth she's a very cold fish, not very emotional. I've never warmed to her. She gives me the creeps, I say to Cynthia. There's something very dark about her. When I first saw her at the book club, sitting on the outside looking at us, all prattling away, I actually felt decidedly sorry for her. But not any more, not at all. Is it wrong to feel this about someone I barely know? To be so judgmental like this? But there's something about her that really irks me. I can't think what it is. Normally I don't have an unkind word to say about most people, but she's the exception to that rule. It's called intuition, dear, whispers Cynthia. I know exactly what you mean. She's an oddball. Like you say, there's something off about her. But if she's happy to be paid for watching me all day long, I'm all right with that. Anything to avoid the perils of an old age home. Believe me, when you get to my age, the pressure for you to move away from your home, from outside sources, becomes immense. People worry about you, that you're not going to manage on your own, you're not going to cope, you're going to fall down the staircase. But when they know someone is living with you, managing your affairs, they shut up and stop poking their noses in your business. They may be well-meaning, but I love my independence, and I'm not quick to give that up. Unless, of course, I really am immobile, and then I will have to change my mind about things. Well, I guess it makes me feel a lot better that you're not alone, Cynthia. I mean, you are getting older, so it's a relief to know if you fall or something that Selby will be to the rescue. But I do get why you live here. You should never be bullied to leave your home. That's entirely your decision. And you're perfectly capable of making those decisions on your own. I mean, if I was your age, I wouldn't want to leave this place either, unless I had to, unless I was completely immobile. Your house is so dreamy, and those ocean views are spectacular. That's why I love it here, says Cynthia, rolling her hands together appreciatively. Sometimes I sit out there on the couch, looking out to sea with my telescope, watching everything outside. I remember when I first bought this house, it was love at first sight. I knew I had to have it. I persuaded my husband to buy it. We never looked back after that. We were so happy here. Sadly, my husband died 5 years ago. Renal failure it was. It was very lonely without him, but the sea views and this house pulled me through. And every time I felt overwhelmed, I'd take a long walk out on the beach, and a peace would come over me. It was as if my husband was walking with me. I almost felt his presence. It was so wonderful. Maybe he was, I say. You don't know. And I imagine the walks must have been so restorative to your soul. Then there's your house, with its incredibly engaging views, where you can watch the boats bobbing out on the ocean there. It would be pretty difficult to be sad here for very long. I love your house's classic, timeless design. It's the kind of house that can sail through the generations and never actually look out of place. And the interiors are spectacular. The high ceilings, the marble fireplaces, the chandeliers, the sweeping staircase, not to mention the floor-to-ceiling windows on your amazing patio areas. For a woman in your 80s, your house is, how can I say, well, very in vogue. It's not dated at all, not even your furnishings, but then that's the classic stuff for you, isn't it? Rather like classical music. It just doesn't date. Good point, Skye. I do try to keep my decor current, but classic, and over the years me and my husband did alterations to the place to maximise the sea views. When I first moved here, there was no houses around for many miles. It was wonderful. It was like we had the beach entirely to ourselves. Mind you, we could never swim. The water was freezing cold. But every morning I would have long walks on the beach, and boy, did I love it. I was glad to see that Selby was in the kitchen preparing Cynthia's evening dinner, and not eavesdropping on our conversation, but I could hear her clanking around very loudly with the pots and pans. She was not very quiet. It was almost like she wanted to be heard, as if she was making us fully aware of how hard she was actually working. That's another good thing about having her here, whispers Cynthia. She keeps the house nice and clean, and she's not a bad cook either. She's been cooking Haitian dishes recently, like Haitian chicken fritters, grigot, which is baked pork shoulder, and pen patate, which is a sweet potato pudding. And they are very tasty, although in truth I prefer more traditional classical southern food, but it's like Selby seems to have adopted this Creole culture, which is peculiarly bizarre. It's almost like she's shunned and disengaged her own southern roots, as if she thinks they're not colourful enough for her. She's got strange African-American Haitian friends whom she spends all her spare time with. Goodness knows why she mixes with them. I don't know what the attraction is. Sometimes they spend time in her bedroom playing loud music together. I don't know what they get up to when they get together, But after they've been here, the house feels so much darker from their presence. I met the one. His eyes were as black as coal. Scared the hell out of me, they did. So now when they come into the house, I always avoid eye contact with them. I hate it when they're here. It feels as if they've impertinently intruded and invaded upon my space. The two men, they're so tall, very big. They wear their hair in hundreds of these shoulder-length braids. And there's something menacing about them, but I can't quite think what it is. It's probably because you don't identify with the Haitian culture. It can be exceedingly intimidating when you meet people from a different culture, so different to our own that you don't understand. I heard once when the Queen of England went to New Zealand, the New Zealand rugby team did the haka dance for her. It freaked her out. It scared her so much. Well, that's what I heard. The dance is designed to be intimidating to competitors. You're probably right, dear, says Cynthia. When people come from different parts of the world and engage in different religious practices and have different perspectives, it's hard to relate to them. I defy anyone to even suggest it's about skin colour. It's not about race at all. Of course you know what the elites would do. They'd turn it around on us to make it seem as if it's all about race, so they can bring discord between us. Part of their manipulative agenda, I suspect. But it's all about culture, and those differences can be so incredibly profound. That's why it's enigmatic to me that a young southern girl like Selby would be so entwined with these tall Haitian men. It's Ricardo that's the big problem. He's the one that gives me the heebie-jeebies. He's got soulless eyes. The other one, Daniel, is not so bad, but then again he never smiles. They both look so intense all the time, as if their minds are otherwise engaged. They speak Creole and French, but their pidgin English is not that good, and they're so unfriendly. You see that necklace over there? She says, pointing to this long leather necklace that is covered in strange-shaped wooden amulets made from Malayan wood and beads that are hanging on her wall and look very out of place next to some rather striking pieces of contemporary art. Oh, yes, I did wonder what that was. It looks rather curious. It's called a criss-criss, says Cynthia. Selby gave it to me. It's a Haitian lucky charm, I believe, from Voodoo. It's supposed to ward off evil, to bring you good luck. Well, the wearer good luck, that is. Selby wanted me to wear it, but I appeased her by putting it on the wall. I find the thing hideously grotesque, very ugly, but I don't tell her that. She meant well giving it to me, bless her heart, but I think it's the ugliest necklace I have ever seen. I look at Cynthia aghast. You mean that's a lucky amulet connected to Voodoo? I don't like the sound of that. Doesn't that disturb you? I mean, do you think Selby could be engaged with those practices? Nothing would surprise me with her, dear. Selby is very unorthodox. 2 years later, it was early in the morning when my cell phone rang. It was Selby. I'd never received a phone call from the objectionable woman a day in my life, and I didn't want to start hearing from her now. Seeing her name on my caller ID was more than a little unsettling for me, for there was no love lost between the two of us. My first thought that came into my mind was, she's phoning about Cynthia. Is Cynthia all right? Hello, Sky. It's Selby here. I wouldn't bother coming around to visit Cynthia anymore, if I were you. She's not here. What? Is she all right? I ask. No, she's not. That's why I'm phoning you, Sky. Her spirit has left the earthly domain. You mean she's dead? What do you think I mean, Sky? Her spirit has left the earthly domain and is negotiating the hereafter. How did it happen, I say, unable to restrain the tears that are bursting through my eyelids and trailing down my cheeks. I knew that Selby was weird, but the way she was talking was exceedingly bizarre. How do you think it happened? Came Selby's condescending, irritated voice, as if my question was the most stupid question she had ever heard. I told you, her spirit left her body. There's nothing complicated about that. Do you know nothing about dying, Sky? Are you that naive? I'm not asking you that, Selby, I say obsequiously. I just wish you'd speak more simply. I mean, how did she die? Did she die in her sleep? Did she have a fall, an accident? Was it a peaceful death? I need to know she didn't suffer. She died at her appointed time, Sky.
I found her in bed this morning. She looked very comfortable. Of course she didn't suffer. She wasn't sick, was she? Nor did she have a fall. Her exit from this earthly domain was smooth. Now I need to go. I just thought you needed to be informed. I'll let you know about the funeral arrangements. Thank you, Selby. I'll appreciate that. I just want to say I'm very sorry for your loss. What loss? Says Selby, confounded. The woman's moved on to another realm. She's not dead. 5 months later. I couldn't believe that I'd moved into Cynthia's old house. It was beautiful. I'd never dream of selling it, not only because it was magnificent, but because I could feel Cynthia's presence in her home, and it helped me to feel connected to her. I missed the old woman so very much. I was baffled she'd left her house to me, but it turned out she had no surviving family members. Of course, the news that Selby had not received anything in the inheritance had gone down like a lead balloon when she discovered that Cynthia had left everything to me. She had stormed into my inherited house, screaming the riot act at me, without even bothering to knock. I made sure I changed the locks after her unexpected, very unwelcome visit. "Who do you think you are?" she spouted. "Cynthia was going to leave this house to me, and you surreptitiously manipulated her to change her will, didn't you? How did you do it, you little vixen? I might have known you had ulterior motives in getting to know Cynthia. You conspired against me to steal her house right under my nose from me. She left everything to you, and she left me a piddling $50,000 after everything I did for her. I cooked and I cleaned for her. I took her driving and shopping. I watched over her like a hawk, and this is the thanks I get. Ricardo said you couldn't be trusted. The moment he saw you getting all cosy with Cynthia, he said you needed watching. Ricardo's always right. I should have listened to him." "You misunderstand everything, Selby. Cynthia was a great friend to me. I may not have known her for very long, but we became very close in that short period of time. We had a special connection, and I'm sorry you feel hard done by. I assure you there was no conspiracy. I'm surprised as you are, that she left everything to me. I would have thought she might have had some remote family member who would have received her inheritance. I certainly didn't expect to be the recipient of her will. I'm honoured she left everything to me. Over the last couple of years, she has become a grandmother figure to me, and my very best friend. I'm going to miss her terribly. I feel as if a huge presence has left my life. Losing her is one of the hardest losses in my life. I know she was grateful to you, Selby, for everything you did. She told me about your Creole cooking and how you kept the place lovely and clean. I could see that myself. The house was always spotless." Selby scoffed. "Like I believe that for a second. All this mumbo-jumbo you're spouting. You were always after Cynthia's money, weren't you, all along? I should have smelt a rat from the very beginning, acting so buddy-buddy with her when all along you just wanted her money." "I did want something from Cynthia, Selby. You're absolutely right about that. But it's not what you think. I wanted her friendship, but her home and her money. No, I didn't give those things a wavering or a fleeting thought. I would never have expected her to leave me all this. No one was more surprised than I was." "Liar, liar," says Selby, hissing at me like a snake. "I'll tell you something for nothing. You'll rue the day, Skye, that you ever met Cynthia. And I'll make sure you pay a big price for stealing my inheritance from under my nose. This house was supposed to be mine. Oh, by the way, can I have the necklace that was hanging on the wall over there? The one I gave Cynthia. I want it back. I'm certainly not going to let you keep it." "Of course," I say. "I'll go and get it for you." I was so glad I'd actually kept it. I'd been very eager to throw the ghastly thing out, but something made me keep it. I suppose I thought that throwing something lucky away was possibly not a good idea, even if it was exceedingly ugly. I handed it back to her. "Here it is," I say. She grabs it from me, running her fingers over the beads and the string-shaped wooden charms. "I gave this to Cynthia, you know. It protected her, although why I bothered after her duplicity, selling me short on that will of hers, I honestly don't know. You know what this is, do you, Skye?" she asks me, giving me a wide, smirkish grin.
It was the first time I'd ever seen Selby actually smile, but the grin she gave me was not the kind variety. It was a smile that masked an insidious malevolence that made my skin crawl and the hair on the back of my neck stand up on end. And in that moment I had an overwhelming sense that Selby would love to extract some kind of revenge on me, as she felt I'd stolen her inheritance, and a sense of foreboding loomed over my heart like a dark shadow. Yes, I do. Cynthia told me it's a criss-criss, some kind of Haitian lucky charm. Very interesting piece of jewellery, I must confess. That's right. It's a criss-criss. Believe me, you're going to miss it not being around you, Skye says, with a wicked glint in her eye. Well, I'll be off now. I do hope you enjoy wallowing in your ill-gotten gains, Skye. As it always comes at a price, believe me, I know. She straightens her back. Right, I'm going now, she says, clutching the criss-criss in her hands so tightly that her white knuckles begin to show. Goodbye, Selby. I wish you all the best in your life, I say. I'll see you out. I am sad you feel so put out about the will. I say this as I escort her to the front door. You're sorry, she says, glaring at me. Please, Skye, like I believe that. If you were truly sorry, you'd hand the house and the money over to me, wouldn't you? You'd do the right thing. But no, you're keeping every last penny to yourself, aren't you? You'll pay big time for your greed. You're going to need to watch your back. Selby swaggers over to her truck with an indignant inebriation, not brought on by alcohol, but by the intoxication of her fury. It is in that poignant moment that I see there are two obscure figures waiting in the truck for her. One is seated in the driver's seat. He climbs out of the driver's seat to open the passenger side door for Selby to get into the car, while the other man is seated in the back. It was Ricardo who opens the door for her. He's so tall, so large, wearing a white cotton shirt and a criss-criss around his neck, but a much simpler one than Selby gave Cynthia. It's got a couple of rhino horn-shaped miniature amulets attached to it. He glances in my direction, his soulless, devilish eyes as black as coal. They send shivers of trepidation running down my spine, and uneasy butterflies flapping around my stomach. He gives me the coldest, most contemptuous look, and then his malignant pupils went from jet black to completely white. It was the most sinister thing that I have ever seen. He then looked directly at me. He laughed a hideous laugh that didn't even sound remotely human. I felt a sense of disquiet as they drove away, and I had this baleful prognostication come over me that spoke to my gut, a warning bell that sounded in my intuition. This is not the last that you've seen of Selby Dianthus. And I knew that my feeling was absolutely right. So there we are. That's the end of part 1. Part 2 is tomorrow night. Until next time, goodbye and good night.